Thank you for watching our show tonight, Polygamy, What Love Is This? I'm your host, Doris Hanson, and we are here to talk about polygamy, and we discuss polygamy and its practices from a biblical perspective. For instance, polygamy groups generally teach a high standard of morality, which includes teaching obedience to the basic 10 Commandments. But at the same time, they'll turn around and systematically lie about many aspects of their polygamous lifestyle, and they'll teach their children selective lying as well. We're going to be talking about this a little bit later on in the program. We are broadcasting live from Salt Lake City, Utah, and this is a telephone call-in program. Our telephone number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. We'll be answering your questions a little bit later on in the show. If you have questions or comments about polygamy that you would prefer to ask us off the air, you can email us at tv@aboutpolygamy.com. All of our previous programs can be watched on our website, whatloveisthis.tv. They're all there on streaming video, and you can go there at any time and watch them. And you can also access the top questions that are asked during the program on whatloveisthis.tv/answers. And if your question that you want to call in or that you might want to email is there on the website, then of course your answer will be there, so you won't need to call in or email us your question, or you can formulate a different question. You can also log on to our website, shieldandrefuge.org, to find out more about our organization. You can donate to our ministry off the website, and if you want to learn more about polygamy, you can go to shieldandrefuge.org and find out more about that. And if you're part of a polygamy group, and if you are being abused or oppressed, if you want to have more information about us and how we can help you, you can go to that website, and there's contact information there. We would love to talk with you. We have a toll-free number. It's 877-425-9993. You can give us a call, and we will talk to you about your situation. We also want those in polygamy to know, especially if you're dissatisfied with what you're doing and with your life, we want you to know that polygamy is not God's plan. It's not something that He had planned for your life at all. It isn't what He wants you to do, and we can help you understand that too if you want to give us a call. I'd like to remind our viewers tonight about the Capstone Conference. It's taking place on March 12th and 13th, and the conference is free, but pre-registration is required. The theme of the conference is the person Joseph Smith, who he was, what he believed, and what he taught. There's going to be guest speakers there from all over the nation. It's going to be interesting, and we hope to see many of you there. It will be at the Calvary Chapel at 460 Century Drive in Salt Lake City, and you can access full information and registration at the website capstoneconference.com. That's capstoneconference.com. In Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 5, we find listed there in both places the 10 Commandments, which God gave directly to Moses to give to the children of Israel. And in both places we read that the 9th commandment says, "Thou shalt not bear false witness." Throughout the Bible, we do find that false witness or telling lies is extremely displeasing to God. For instance, Proverbs chapter 12, verse 22 says, "Lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are His delight." So if you want the Lord to delight in you, and if you want your life to be delightful to Him, then you'll live a life of truth. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 25 says, "We are to put away lying and speak every man truth to his neighbor." And so pleasing God is having a life of truth. And in polygamy group, that's almost impossible to do. James chapter 1, verse 13 says, "Let no man say when he is tempted that I am tempted of God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and neither does He tempt any man." So God never lies, nor does He command or suggest or justify or tempt us to bear false witness for any reason. And Titus chapter 1 verse 2 tells us that God cannot lie. Now that isn't saying that he chooses not to lie or that he doesn't want to lie. It means that it's impossible for him to lie. He can't lie. It's not in his nature, and God cannot go against his nature. It's interesting that we find in the Pearl of Great Price that Abraham and Sarah are suggested by God to lie to Pharaoh. And it's possible for Abraham and Sarah to lie, but it is not possible, absolutely impossible for God to recommend or suggest that we ever lie. He'll never put us in that situation. And for polygamists who hold the Book of Mormon dear to their heart, 2 Nephi chapter 9 verse 34 says, "Woe unto the liar, for he shall be thrust down to hell." There's no exceptions given for those who lie about their polygamist activities. Tonight we're going to dig deeply into the early Mormon polygamist activities of lying, their deceitfulness and their denials of their practice of polygamy, and they would be doing that while they themselves were practicing the polygamy. And they would rationalize that they're lying for the Lord. And it is a practice, unfortunately, that never stopped. I remember very clearly when I was a child, we would be called in meetings and talked to and told and threatened and warned what we said, to be careful what we said, that our lifestyle was not to be talked about outside of the home. And we were told what to say if the sheriff ever stopped us and asked us questions, or if the teacher at school ever asked us questions, if we had playmates, which we weren't allowed to have, because they were afraid that we would tell them the truth of our life. And I think back about that now. I remember back in those times and the threats. If we were threatened with becoming sons of perdition, if we ever said anything, which would of course would be the truth, that would get them in trouble. And I see what people say, and I watch the news, and I read some of the articles that people who leave polygamy groups say, and it's just amazing to me to know that they're still doing this. They're still lying, and they're teaching their children to lie from the cradle. Sadly, the fact that they're lying about telling lies is the most deplorable lie of all. Now, we have a very special guest tonight that is here for the discussion of going back into early Mormon history about their lies and deceits, and of course it's Sandra Tanner. And with her expertise, we shall uncover some cover-ups that took place in early Mormon history. And thanks again for coming to our show, Sandra.
Nice to be here.
You know, I was thinking as I was going through the notes and putting together the notes, kind of funny that I'd think this, but I thought it ought to be illegal to have a show like this without you here, because you have so much information, so much tucked away in your mind. And we're going to go through the historical evidence of from the beginning, working through as far as we can of the lies and the deceits that they practiced about their early Mormon activities. The early Mormons lied about it, and even their publications, they publicized that they weren't doing what they were doing. I guess my question, going back to my childhood, maybe comments to you perhaps, is we were told that God needed us to lie for His kingdom. That if we didn't, if it was exposed, if the polygamy group, and of course we were the kingdom of God, nobody else was, just us, this little group over here, but God had to be protected. And the only way that we could protect Him and His kingdom on earth was to lie. And I think back that now, and I think, my goodness, isn't God powerful enough to protect Himself and His own people?
Right. But it's the whole history of Joseph's living of polygamy. I mean, it starts clear back in 1831. I mean, the Mormons will tell you, but 1831 is supposedly when Joseph first gets some revelation about polygamy, and yet that's all lied about and covered up through the whole history of Mormonism. At every turn, every practice, it was always a cover-up.
It was a cover-up, and we go clear to even past 1890, you know, where the
right.
declaration for the
manifesto.
Yeah. And polygamy itself was always illegal. And let's start with the legality or the illegality of it, because if it's not illegal, they don't have to lie about it.
Right. There was a law in 1833 passed in Illinois making bigamy a crime. And so when the Mormons were in Illinois, which was their main time of living polygamy, although Joseph had lived polygamy earlier than when they went to Illinois, but it was one or two incidences, Fanny Alger, whether or not you make her a wife or an affair, but that's in Ohio. But when they get to Illinois, it's clearly against the law of the state, and the Mormons have to do a cover-up to, well, Joseph has to do a cover-up. The average Mormon didn't even know that polygamy was going on. And so you have, as you mentioned, the Pearl of Great Price in the Book of Abraham, where Joseph Smith has this story, a rerun of the story in the Bible, where Abraham lies about his wife being his sister, so that to save his own neck. But in the Bible, it doesn't say God tells him to lie.
Right.
But in the Pearl of Great Price, Joseph changes the story to have God tell him this. And the reason Joseph recasts the story is, I think, to explain to his inner circle that no, he's living polygamy, why he's lying about it publicly. So this could be used as an excuse. Well, God told Abraham to lie about his wife, and so there are times when God justifies lying for the Lord, and so this is why I'm allowed to do this now, because otherwise we'd get arrested. And so I have Mormons justify this to me by saying, well, there would have been such persecution against the church if they would have told that this was being practiced. And I said, well, yes, if you rob a bank, you lie about it too. I mean, anytime you're breaking the law, you're going to lie about it to not get arrested. But the point is whether God would have told you to do it.
Right.
And that's where the problem comes in.
And it goes back to that verse where it says that God doesn't tempt anyone. He doesn't suggest or tempt us, tell us to lie about anything. It's going against his very nature. And clear back even up to John Taylor, the third president of the church, he said in Journal of Discourses 20 that he claimed that he believes in keeping all the laws of the United States except one. And that, of course, is polygamy. So even years later, he's acknowledging that it was illegal.
Right.
It was, and he didn't believe in keeping that law. So the territory, a lot of people, I don't know if you hear this, here I am rambling, but lately it seems like I hear more, and I'm reading more of the apologists for polygamy, saying that, for the Mormon Church, saying that the Mormons quit living polygamy as soon as it became illegal. Are you hearing that more lately than you have in the past? It seems like I have been. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm closer into this. But
well, they've been saying that my whole life, but they may emphasize it more. But it was clearly against the law at the time Joseph Smith was living it. But then the average Mormon doesn't even know that Joseph Smith lived it.
A lot of them weren't at that time.
Well, a lot of the Mormons weren't, but the Mormons today many times don't even know Joseph lived polygamy. They might know about the section in the Doctrine and Covenants, but I talk to Mormons quite often that don't know that Joseph lived it. They just think it was something that they did when they came west, and they don't even think about Joseph Smith's involvement in it. I find many Mormons are very surprised when I tell them he had at least 33 plural wives, maybe 38, maybe more.
Maybe more. That's true. They don't realize that, and I didn't. I've said that before on the show, that I had no idea that Joseph Smith was a polygamist. I thought that the others were, but not that he and Hiram and the others were. Another incident was Annalisa Webb. She demonstrates that Brigham Young knew that it was illegal when she tried to get a divorce from him. And again, this is years later in Utah, but this is just to demonstrate that they knew it was illegal from beginning to end. She tried to get a divorce, and she filed for a legal divorce and for alimony. And Brigham Young himself in court said, it's not a legal marriage. You can't do that. And the judge agreed.
Yes, there's a certain irony in that.
I think there's a big irony. So he's admitting that his own plural marriages were not legal even at that time. And they're not legal in the eyes of the Lord either. No. Because God hasn't decreed it, and he wants us to live the highest. Actually, a lot of polygamists say that that it's a higher law, and that they're required to live the higher law because God wants them to. But the only higher law that the Bible knows of is grace.
Yes.
And grace is something we don't have to lie about. Okay, let's talk about Joseph Smith's denials of polygamy. We've established that it's illegal, and now that Joseph Smith at least knew it was illegal. He knew that much.
Right. Well, it's obvious the way he covers it up through the years that he knew it was illegal. Also, he knew his wife wouldn't accept it. And so he keeps trying to hide it even from Emma. We know in the mid-1830s, there was a young girl living in the Smith home, Fanny Alger, and she was there from 1833 to 1836, I believe. We're not sure exactly when they were supposed to have had a connection. The question is whether it's a marriage or an affair, but so the Mormons today want to list her as a plural wife. But whatever the case is, it certainly was nothing that was being admitted to. Mm-hmm. And so you have in 1835, the Mormons bring in a section into the Doctrine and Covenants that says they don't believe in polygamy, and they denounce it and fornication. Mm-hmm. Well, that section all comes about because there are these rumors going around that the Joseph Smith or the early Mormon someone is practicing polygamy. How many churches have to put a denial in their book saying, you know, we don't believe in practicing polygamy?
We're not doing
this.
this.
So you have him lying about it at that point. But then when they get to Nauvoo, he's lying about it. We know he takes a plural wife in 1841, Louisa Beeman. Mm-hmm. Emma doesn't know about this. He's lying to Emma. He's lying to the church. He's lying to the state. He takes several more wives before he ever even tells Emma about it. And you have this cover-up all through where you were talking about the denials. There's published statements in the Times and Seasons in Joseph Smith's period of Nauvoo where they excommunicate a man for polygamy at the very time that Joseph's taking plural wives. And he publishes a statement denouncing it. And it's just time after time you see this going on in Mormonism.
Mm-hmm. I have a quote here in 1838, and he, of course, this would have been after Fanny Alger, whether or not she was a wife or not, it was still an affair. Yeah. And he said, this is the Elder's Journal, which is edited by Joseph Smith, and a question was asked him. He was asked this question: do the Mormons believe in having more than one wife, or more wives than one? And he said, no, not at the same time, but they believe that if their companion dies, they have a right to marry again. Now, as I was looking through this, I thought, well, maybe the Mormons did not believe in having more than one wife, but Joseph did.
That's right.
And he was the founder and the leader of the Mormons.
Right.
So, and of course, this was after the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants statement on monogamy. But in May of 1844, Joseph Smith had already married 33 women. And he said in History of the Church, we can read this in Volume 6, and this is a well-known statement. In fact, we talked about this before the show. He said, I'd been scarcely married 5 minutes and made one proclamation of the gospel before it was reported that I had 7 wives. I mean to live and proclaim the truth as long as I can. Now, this is where he's saying he's telling the truth, and he isn't. He says, this spiritual wifeism, why a man does not speak or wink for fear of being accused of this. What a thing it is for a man to be accused of committing adultery and having 7 wives when I can only find one. And this was in 1844.
Yes, it's just a short time before his death.
Yeah.
And again, you see this pattern established that carries through Mormonism for the next 70 years of lying about a practice that's going on truly within their ranks, but out in the public is being hidden and lied about.
I find this interesting that he calls committing polygamy adultery.
Right.
He refers to it as the sin that it is. And there were a lot of people that, when they did discover that there was this deceit going on, I don't know how many, I say a lot, but there were several who actually left the church when they discovered that there was this deceit going on behind the scenes.
Right. Well, you had some leave when they got propositioned.
Yeah.
I mean, like you got Martha Brotherton gets approached by Brigham Young in, what is that, 42 or 43? I don't remember the year, but Brigham Young calls her to a meeting up in the office of Joseph Smith and locks her in the room and starts telling her how God's revealed this new law for the new age and that she was to be his plural wife. And she isn't willing to accept this. And so finally they bring Joseph Smith in to try to convince her that this was all right, that it was approved of God. And so Martha was pretty smart. She was a quick thinker, I guess, and she said, well, I really have to pray about this. Maybe I should go home and pray. And so she finally convinced them to unlock the door and let her go home and pray about it. Well, then she ends up leaving Mormonism, leaving the area, and she then wrote up her experience, and it was published in the newspaper. So it had to be 42. And so this becomes the start of the unraveling of the whole polygamy story, because her story then ends up in John C. Bennett's expose of Mormonism, where one of Joseph's sidekicks, John Bennett, leaves Mormonism and exposes the polygamy in his History of the Saints. And you have this whole endeavor to lie and cover up what's really going on. And so they end up smearing Martha Brotherton's reputation in the newspaper, and I mean, called her, a whore. I mean, it was just terrible, the things they said about this young girl who just honestly came forward and said, these men are doing despicable things. They locked me in this room to make me accept polygamy. And instead of them repenting, they set out to just smear this girl's reputation.
And he would threaten that.
Yes.
If you tell anybody about this, he did that with Sarah Pratt.
And Nancy Rigdon.
And Rigdon, yeah. Actually, we're going to be talking about that next week. So not only did Joseph Smith, the founder in the church, lie about polygamy and his own activities, he introduced it secretly to Brigham Young and Hiram Smith and others, and he asked them also to be involved in this deceit and lie about what they were doing behind the backs of the other people.
Right,
Mormons.
Hiram Smith went on record in the Times and Seasons with a statement against saying that they did not believe polygamy, they didn't live it. And at the time, he had 2 or 3 wives when he made his statement.
I have one here. I don't know if this is the one or a different one that you're referring to. March 15th, 1844, which was just a few months before they were shot, Volume 5, where he denies. He says that Brother Hewitt had asked to know his views about some doctrines that were being preached, and stated that some of the elders say that a man having a certain priesthood must have as many wives as he may have as many wives as he pleases, and that the doctrine of polygamy was taught there. And he said there's no such doctrine taught there, nor is there any such thing being practiced. And then it says that he had, I think, 5 wives at that time. Had at least 5 wives. It's got them named here too. What wives they were. So not only was Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram Smith, but also the publications. The Mormon publications were denying it. So truth-telling wasn't taking place.
No.
At all. We want to remind you that we will be opening up the phone lines in a few minutes. If you want to start making phone calls, you can. You might hold on for a few minutes. Our number is 801-973-TV20, 801-973-8820. If you have a question for the subject matter tonight, or for Sandra, or for myself regarding what we're talking about. Now, you mentioned that Doctrine and Covenants, more of the publications that publicly denied the practice of polygamy. And it says in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants that inasmuch as the Church of Christ has been reproached with the crime of fornication and polygamy, and then they go on to declare that they believe in only having one wife and one husband and so on. So even in that, they were calling it a crime. They recognize that it's illegal and it's a crime. So they're practicing knowingly practicing what they know is wrong. And then the Doctrine and Covenants 132, the heading, as you lead into the revelation itself, records that the doctrine, although it wasn't recorded until 1843, all indications are that Joseph Smith received it way back in 1831.
Well, there's evidence that he was teaching it as early as 31. The first missionaries were sent out to teach, to try to convert the Indians in Missouri, and the men that went out to preach to them were married men, but Joseph gave a private revelation that they were to marry amongst the Indian women, and that this would hopefully raise up a white and delightsome people from the children that have with these Indian women. And so that it is the start of the doctrine of polygamy in Mormonism, but at that time there was no teaching that it was a sealing or temple marriage or anything that way. It was just to marry the Indian women. Well, no one married an Indian woman, the whole thing fell through, but it is the start of his forming this doctrine of polygamy.
I find it interesting that when you read section 132, that it states it's required for salvation, you'll be damned if you don't practice it, and yet Joseph Smith kept it secret for 12 years.
Yes.
How many people would have died not having the opportunity to become a god because he hid this revelation?
Right.
And we read in the Bible, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, in fact I think Jeremiah got a revelation that he didn't want to give because it was talking about the destruction of his people, and he tried to hold it back and he couldn't. And after a few hours of trying to hold it back, he finally gave in and proclaimed, because God gives revelations to proclaim to the people, not to hide.
Right.
And Joseph Smith didn't do that. We have the Millennial Star in 1842. And again, publications. And
Church publications,
Church
yes.
publications that Joseph Smith would be aware of. And of course, again, a lot of them people did not know that that the people behind the scenes were practicing polygamy.
Well, yes, and the Millennial Star was printed in England, so the Mormons in England wouldn't have known about the polygamy that would have happened in Nauvoo. I mean, the church leaders that went over there would have known.
Yeah, that's just what I was going to say.
But the average member wouldn't have known.
Right, absolutely right. In fact, they denied it to the members over there. There is, I think this is interesting, in 1857, we're jumping ahead a few years, but it's volume 19, and I downloaded this, cut and pasted it off the internet, but it's the actual book. And it says the Latter-day Saints from the rise of the church in 1830 till the year 1843 had no authority to marry any more than one wife each. Yeah. No authority till 1843, and by then Hiram had all his wives, Brigham Young had already taken wives, Joseph Smith had all his wives.
Nice. Right.
And it says to have done otherwise would have been a great transgression. But when the commandment came for the purpose of multiplying a righteous people, polygamy became lawful under circumstances where it would not transgress the laws of the land. It never was lawful.
No, it was always against the law. It's one of the ironies of the whole discussion of it is that they always are maintaining that they are being honest and forthright, and yet the whole history of polygamy is one of lie and cover-up.
Which makes me wonder, and I guess I just feel like I need to say right here, I was raised on the lies and taught how to lie and what to lie about. And as we read through the early history of the Mormons, does God, is He really the author of this kind of deceit? I mean, common sense tells you He's not.
Right.
He's not going to put you or anyone else in a situation where you're forced to lie about your life, your entire life. It just isn't of God. Well, we do have a couple of calls coming in. We do have a little bit more to talk about here. I do want to talk about John Taylor. Would you? Let's talk about that before we go to the phone calls.
John Taylor was an apostle. He went on a mission to Europe. And so in 1850, he's over in France, and he has a public debate with a minister. The Mormons printed up the debate, and it was published in the Millennial Star printing office into a pamphlet, so the debate was publicly available. Mm-hmm. In the debate, this minister brought up the charges against the Mormons on polygamy. Now remember, they don't publicly admit to polygamy till 1852. This is 1850. So up to this point, the church has been lying and covering up polygamy. So here's John Taylor in France. In this public debate, the minister brings up polygamy, and John Taylor holds up the current Doctrine and Covenants, which has a section in it that was been in since 1835 that said that they don't believe in polygamy, the one you read early, inasmuch as this Church of Christ has been accused of fornication and polygamy. And he reads this out of the Doctrine and Covenants. And so he's putting this minister down. How can you bring this kind of accusation against us when it's right here in our scriptures that we don't believe in polygamy? And yet John Taylor has something like a dozen wives back home at the time that he has this debate. So how do we see a justification for an apostle, someone who claims to be an apostle of Jesus Christ,
and then later a president?
Yes, and later the president, in a public meeting, absolutely lying about his own conduct and what the church was doing. By 1850, many Mormons were living polygamy.
They were. In fact, one of the articles I read about this with John Taylor is that he had a couple of men with him. One of them had 2 wives, and another one was married to a mother and her daughter while he was lying about this. And he called it, in this public debate, he called polygamy, John Taylor in 1850 in France, he said that the charges of polygamy were indelicate, obscene, disgusting, such that none but a corrupt and depraved heart could have contrived. They're too outrageous to admit of belief. And that's what his thinking, that his opinion of polygamy is what he's calling all of these. It's interesting that he would do that.
It's
Very
astounding.
It is. Okay. Well, we're going to answer some phone calls, but first of all, we have a short message that we would like our viewers to see. Are you thinking of leaving your polygamous situation? Are you afraid to leave because you might lose the love of your friends and your family and perhaps even the love of God? Are you afraid you'll become destitute if you do leave? When I ran away from my fundamentalist upbringing and the polygamy environment I was raised in, I had no safe place to go, no place that I knew that I would be safe after I left. And I was so naive, I didn't know that I was exchanging one bad situation for another one. In those days, there were no organizations established to help people who needed to safely exit a polygamist environment. That's why a Shield and Refuge ministry exists today. We're here to help those who want to leave a polygamous situation safely and without fear. We do provide you with a safe refuge, and you will be shielded from those who would harm you. So if you're thinking of leaving your polygamous situation, give us a call. We're here waiting to hear from you. Our telephone number toll-free is 1-877-425-9993. If you have access to the internet, you can locate us at www.shielandrefuge.org, and you can contact us immediately, day or night. We would love to help you. God has made a promise in Psalm 91:4 that He shall cover you with His feathers, and you can take refuge under His wings. And it's His truth that will be your shield. And that's why we're here. We want to help those who are in polygamy, who want to find a better life, a life that is not wrapped up in lies and finding out whether or not you're going to be discovered. Okay, we have a lot of phone calls here. We have Jim in Sandy on line 1. Jim?
Yes.
Yes, Jim, you're on the air.
Hi, Doris.
Hi.
Hi, Sandra.
Hi.
Hey, my question really quickly is, were there that many more women in the territory and in the early church in Illinois and in Missouri than there were men that would allow them to have so many wives?
No, there were never more women than men in Mormonism. In the territory of Utah, we have census records for
the census records bear out that there were actually more men than there were women.
Right, there were more men. Polygamy actually kept men from having a wife.
Mm-hmm.
So, actually, what I'm hearing from the church saying, we did this because there were a lot more women joining the church than there were men, is a lie.
Right. We can show through statistics from government statistics that there were more men than women, and there was no reason for polygamy. There was no necessity for it. It was strictly a doctrinal pursuit that they said was necessary to achieve godhood, had nothing to do with the physical aspects of a woman being able to find a husband.
Right.
Was it really a doctrinal thing for Joseph Smith, or was it just plain lust?
Well, everyone has their own opinion on that, but he certainly proclaimed it.
I'll tell you about his lust.
He proclaimed it as a doctrine necessary for exaltation, and that's why the Mormons suffered so much to enter into it. The women suffered so much and went into it because they really believed it was necessary for them to have eternal life.
Thanks, Sandra. It was nice talking to you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Good night. Okay, we have Brian in Salt Lake City calling. Hello, Brian.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, you're on the air.
Hey, on my research, did the Mormon Church teach that Jesus Christ was not only married but practiced polygamy, and the main reason for his crucifixion was polygamy? And did Joseph Smith believe himself to be a direct blood descendant of Christ?
Yes, I believe all those things were true of early Mormonism. The Mormons would not talk about that today, but it certainly was the position of the church under Joseph Smith and Brigham Young.
And it's also what the modern day Mormon fundamentalists are teaching. They do believe that they are, that Jesus was a polygamist. That's why he came. That he had to do everything in righteousness before we did it, and righteousness is polygamy is included. The Kingston group, they claim that they are a direct descendant from Jesus Christ and one of his wives and children. So it still is there, but not with the mainline church.
Well, you wouldn't want to bring that up at Relief Society.
Probably wouldn't make it too popular.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Bye.
calling. Good night. Okay, we have Ranley in Kearns. Hello, Ranley.
Yes, I would like to get a straight answer from Sandra Turner. I've been curious all my life. My family is the Johnson family, and there's an oral history that Joel Hills Johnson and his young brother Benjamin Franklin Johnson were called in by Joseph Smith, and he said to him, he introduced the principle, he said, and I'm going to ask you for your sister's hand. And they got angry and they said, if you defile our sister, we'll kill you. And then they relented, and actually that family went on to be pretty devout, and all of them practiced polygamy except for one, whose name was George Washington Johnson. I'm not making this up. This is what I've heard. Do you know any of the facts about that, or where I could find out about it?
Well, in the books that deal with Joseph Smith's plural wives, like In Sacred Loneliness, or Todd Compton's book, or George D. Smith's book on Nauvoo polygamy, or in Mormon polygamy, the history of Mormon polygamy by Richard Van Wagner, all three talk about the Nancy Johnson situation, which I assume is what you're thinking of, where supposedly an Eli Johnson, who is said to be a sister of Nancy, brother of Nancy, was upset that Joseph had, they talk about being too familiar. Now, we don't know what that means, but supposedly Joseph was too familiar with Nancy. And so the Mormons admit that this will be in 1832, isn't it?
Right. It was
in
very early
32
days.
that Joseph and Sidney Rigdon are drug out of their beds and tarred and feathered. But so the Mormons want to say it had nothing to do with polygamy. However, a doctor was brought along to castrate Joseph Smith. Now, he didn't do it, but a doctor was brought along for that purpose. So when the Mormons tried to say that the tar and feathering had nothing to do with him making advances on Nancy, then it's curious that this doctor was brought along to castrate him. That sounds to me like someone was very upset about him making a move on her. Now, the Mormons counter and say she didn't have a brother named Eli, and so they question the whole story. The fact is, he was tarred and feathered. There was a doctor brought along to castrate him. There were these charges made. We know Joseph was already teaching some sort of polygamy in 31. We know he went into polygamy or lust, whatever, with Fanny Alger just a couple of years after that. So I have a hard time dismissing the story of Nancy Johnson, especially when he later ends up marrying her in polygamy in Nauvoo. So, it's something that's debated, but you can read about her story in those different books that discuss his plural wives.
Do you think that's my family? Because I've never heard that story before. But another.
Well, if you're from the Benjamin Johnson family, then
yes.
Then that's the same family.
Oh, it is the same family. Oh, that's good to know. My great-grandfather is Joseph Ellis, who was Ben's brother. Now, a quick question, too, that I've heard, and it's hard for me to believe, but I'm starting to listen carefully to what you're saying. I understand that Benjamin Franklin married his brother's granddaughter, and later he married my grandpa's widow. And that also caused some consternation because my grandpa's older brother went around and told his uncle, don't come around our mother anymore, because it was supposed to be one of those protective marriages, and I guess their Uncle Ben thought there was supposed to be some hanky-panky that went with it. I don't know, but to this day, these funny, foggy stories stick with the family, and it still causes disruption in the family.
Well,
even
this is
100 years later here.
This is the problem with all of us that descend from polygamous families. There was a lot of cover-up, a lot of lying, and it's hard to get back to what's the real story on some things, because they were hiding a lot of the polygamous marriages. Like my great-grandfather was Brigham Young Jr. He took a plural wife after the Manifesto, and that certainly was a marriage that was trying to be hid. Then my grandfather, Walter Young, son of Brigham Young Jr., I believe was a polygamist. My grandma told me that he had wanted to go into polygamy, but she had told him no. And yet in family papers, I found a postcard from some woman writing to my grandpa saying, the boys are fine, hope you can come see us soon, your loving wife. And I have no idea who this woman is. So I think there are a lot of things that happened in early Utah, many more polygamous marriages than we even know about, because of the concept of secrecy, especially after the Manifesto.
Well, you and Doris do us a good service, and we can hope that the truth will prevail, and I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you.
Thank you for calling.
Good night.
Good night. You know, as you mentioned that, Sandra, the same things still go on today in the groups. The hiding of certain marriages. Some groups do marrying incest, close, even half brothers and sisters, and the older men, some older men are marrying 15-year-old girls. It still goes on, and it's still hidden. It's still a secretive, deceitful lifestyle.
Well, and unfortunately, because of that, you have the inbreeding within the polygamous groups. You have a lot of illnesses and birth defects and problems with their health issues because of all the close inbreeding. It's one of the sad facts that comes out of the polygamous groups.
It sure is, and it's still so deceitful. God is not the author of this kind of action. Okay, line one, we have Gary from Clinton. Hello, Gary.
Yes.
Yes, you're on the air. Gary? Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, my question is, do you believe in the Book of Mormon?
No.
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 Oh.
We're both Christians that have given up Mormonism and left it many years ago.
Okay, so the scriptures that are in the Book of Mormon then are all false?
I believe so. Well, other than where it quotes the Bible.
Where it quotes the Bible?
Well, obviously, if the Book of Mormon plagiarizes a lot of Bible verses, in those places the Book of Mormon would have truth in it, but it's... I don't believe there were ever any Nephites. I don't believe the Book of Mormon story ever happened.
And you were studying the Book of Mormon at one time, or?
Absolutely. I was a devout Mormon as a teenager. I graduated from seminary. I went to Institute of Religion. I went to the dedication of the Los Angeles Temple. I taught Sunday school. But as a young person I was challenged that there were things in Mormonism that didn't add up. I was told about Joseph Smith changing his doctrines and revising his revelations. I was told that there were problems with Brigham Young's history. And as I started looking into all of these things, I found that there was a lot of dishonesty in early Mormonism, a lot of changes and revisions, and it wasn't the truth that I thought it had been as I was growing up in it. But I was raised in it to accept all these things. But as I went into my adulthood and started seriously looking at it, I realized it just didn't meet the test of truth.
So are you then you're a born again Christian then?
Yes, I am. Uh-huh.
So then, if God were to command the born again Christians to practice polygamy, just hear me out for a moment, and it is against the law, how would you react to that?
I would know he wouldn't do that because it's not scriptural to live polygamy. It's we're called to one man, one wife.
So was Abraham not called?
No.
That the polygamy in the Old Testament was a cultural thing. God never said that it was a doctrine or something they were to live. It was never put forward as something that was going to give them eternal life.
Never commanded by God in any place in the Bible.
Okay,
you will
well,
find.
I guess that's my question.
Okay.
Thanks for your call, Gary. Okay, we have an off-the-air question. What are the people being told in modern-day Mormonism? I imagine in reference to polygamy. It doesn't say that. That's what they're referring to, but that's what it must be.
Well, you have in the Sunday school manuals they were doing there for a while, teachings of the prophets, and then each volume would be on a specific leader of the church, like they had Joseph Smith, and then they had one on Brigham Young. And in the Brigham Young manual, they never mention his plural wives. Here's a man that had 50-some wives. He had 56 or 57 children by these plural wives. It was a great part of his whole life story, and yet when they do this manual on Brigham Young, they never mention these different wives. So even today you have the church covering up their real history and not explaining to people how important polygamy was in the early history of Mormonism.
A huge part of their early history is polygamy. So, and they're taught. Again, we did for weeks and actually months. We did on the show myths of early Mormon polygamy and some of the things that the Mormons today are taught of why they practice. And one of them is the census. It's a myth that there were more women than men, and so they had to marry them. That's one of the myths. And another one is the widows that had to be taken care of, and so on. But anyway, we had 16 myths of why they were, and I'm sure there's more, but that's the 16 that we dealt with. But there's a lot of things that they are covering up on regarding polygamy even today.
Well, you go to the Church Visitor Center and they show this movie on the life of Joseph Smith, but it isn't clear why he's being arrested, why he's in the jail.
Right.
Nothing is said about it. All stems from his practice of polygamy, and then when the Nauvoo expositor exposed his polygamy, he ordered the destruction of the newspaper, and that's what led to his arrest and putting him in jail.
Right.
So his whole death comes about because of polygamy, and yet nothing in the film is ever mentioned about this.
And you were mentioning about tar and feather earlier, and it took me back to my child and why we were taught, and I'm sure others were taught the same way, even in the Mormon church. They were taught about the persecution and the tar and the feather and all of this, and I thought how horrible to have this done, but they never told the other side of the story, the why, like you just said. One of the main freedoms of our country is freedom of the press.
Yes.
And Joseph Smith violated that in a big way when he ordered that destroyed. So there were many reasons why people were persecuted. Okay, we have Jackie from Salt Lake City. Hello, Jackie.
Hi.
Yes, you're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, I'm calling because you have talked about so many different subjects tonight. And my question is that I haven't heard you refer to any documentation on any of the subjects you've talked about. And I'm just going to give you one example. One was when you talked about Mormons believing that they have a bloodline to Jesus Christ. And I saw that in a movie recently, but it was in a movie that was written as fiction, and they said that they didn't know that wasn't really true. And then I've heard that was where the kings and queens, why they intermarried, and all the kings and queens over in Europe were intermarried, and it was supposedly because of the bloodline. I'd like you to document where you're getting your information, not just about that subject, but many of the different subjects you've talked about.
Well, on the
for
blood...
me, when I don't know, what part is your opinions and what part is your documentation?
Okay, as far as the bloodlines, you would have to contact me for the references. I don't have them on the tip of my tongue. But as far as the documentation generally of what we talked about, these are books by two Mormon historians. These are not books by people that have left Mormonism or that are apostates. These are historians recognized in the community. One is called Solemn Covenant, the Mormon Polygamous Passage by B. Carmen Hardy. This is a university professor who is Mormon, and he talks about polygamy after the manifesto, and he documents that there were like 230 men that went into polygamy after the manifesto, top church leaders, the apostles, the stake presidents, the bishops, and he outlines them all and documents and gives the references. The other book, Mormon Polygamy, A History by Richard Van Wagner, again, a recognized, respected historian on early Mormonism. These books are readily available in the bookstores here in Salt Lake. They both outline the kinds of things that we've been talking about, the lies, the cover-up, the laws, the number of wives, the secrecy, the denials, the John Taylor incident. All of these things are detailed in books currently available that are by recognized historians.
Well, I appreciate you reading up those books, because before I've been watching the show since I started, and I did not see you refer to any of those books. And I go, okay, where are they getting their documentation?
And some of what I've been reading tonight too, I've mentioned that I've been reading it from some of the publications where you can read it, whether it's History of the Church or Journal of Discourses or some of the publications of the early church. I have mentioned where we got those quotes. Also, a couple of very good books Sandra's already mentioned is In Sacred Loneliness by Todd Compton and Nauvoo Polygamy by George, is it D. Smith?
George D. Smith, and both of those men are Mormons.
Okay. Well, I don't care if they're Mormons or not. I just wanted to know where the documentation came from. And also, now, during the time when they tarred and feathered because of the polygamy, but didn't they also murder and tar and feather the women and children too?
No, never. No.
Or do you know?
No, they weren't, ever.
That didn't happen.
Okay, so it was just the men.
Well, it was just Joseph and Sidney Rigdon.
The
Mormons talk about all this persecution. There really was not that much in regards to polygamy. The Mormons lied about it and kept it secret.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate your referencing the books. I appreciate that.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks for your call. Good night. Okay, we have Elizabeth in Logan. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi.
Hi, you're on the air.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, what's your question?
My question is, well, they said that you're talking about the history of Mormonism, but I'm just asking, some of the reference that you are making, you keep saying that it is still going on. Now, is that with the main Mormons, or is it with the other Mormons?
I always say with the Mormon fundamentalists or the polygamy groups of today. There are thousands of polygamists in the Intermountain West, and that is who I'm referring to.
Yes, they are not members of the regular standard LDS church, but they live polygamy because they are following the words of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. The polygamous groups would consider that they are the true Mormons and that the LDS church has gone into apostasy because they aren't living the full doctrines that these early prophets had established.
Does that answer your question?
I understand that both of you are very educated. You seem very smart, and you're very sweet people. And I just needed to have more understanding, and I am a convert. and I've been a convert for 13 years, and so I'm still learning, and that's why I'm listening to your program tonight.
Elizabeth, can I make a recommendation? Sandra has a website that is just loaded with information, and it's utlm.org.
O-R-G,
And you can go there and just type in anything that you want to find out about, and there's information there for you.
Have you read Section 132 in the Doctrine and Covenants?
No, I have not.
Well, Section 132 is still in the Doctrine and Covenants. That's Joseph Smith's revelation on polygamy. I think you ought to read that. That's what Joseph Smith gave secretly behind closed doors to just his select followers when he introduced polygamy. And it was written down specifically to take to Emma, his wife, to try to convince her about polygamy. And it wasn't printed in the Doctrine and Covenants for years. These were all secret things done in Nauvoo. And you have to understand that the whole history of polygamy is one of lie and cover-up. And that's why we have the program. We want people to come to faith in Christ, not looking to a man.
Well, that's why I'm listening to you tonight, because I never realized at all that there was any cover-up. I thought it was all open to everyone that they were doing polygamy.
No.
In the past.
They never admitted polygamy till 1852 here in Utah, and by then Brigham Young had dozens of wives before he ever publicly admitted it.
In fact, Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball took many of Joseph Smith's widows as their
plural wives.
Yes. So,
well, I do appreciate your time.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We appreciate your call. Good night.
Good night.
Okay, we still have a couple more calls and off the air. If you want to leave a message with the operator, we are coming to the end of the show, and I will call you back if you'd like, or I can email you back if you want to email tv@aboutpolygamy.com. Rachel in St. George, anonymous, please call or leave a message and I'll call you back. And I'd like to thank you for coming tonight, Sandra, full of information as usual, and thank you for watching. Thank you for calling and participating in the show. I'd like to say, and in closing, that God has in the Bible some good news and some bad news. The bad news is that the wages of sin is death, and death will be thrown in the lake of fire. The good news is that the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. God will pay all wages that are earned. He would be unjust if He didn't. But there's only one answer to being thrown into the lake of fire, which is where death is going, and that answer is Jesus Christ and His righteousness. Do you want to be judged by your own works, or would you rather be judged by the perfect personal righteousness of Jesus Christ? That is our choices, and that's your choice. We want to thank you all for watching the show tonight, and we hope to see you again next week on Polygamy. What love is this? Good night.